also have to say much more about it in both our educational systems and our public education. For example, there was a column in the New York Times by a very bright conservative columnist, David Brooks, saying how wonderful it was going to be that there were going to be an additional 100 million Americans by 2040. And this at a time when our infrastructure is collapsing, because every time you double the size of the population, you have to double everything you have to support it. When we're drilling a mile underwater to try and get the last drops of petroleum and invading other countries to get it, and arming ourselves for a war over the remains of petroleum and so on. People have got to learn what's going on in the world, and I think we have a general problem that in our education systems and certainly in the mass media, you have no real coverage of the issue. Has anybody listening to this program ever heard a major newscast point out that the more people you have, the more greenhouse gases you have in the atmosphere, everything else being equal, and the greater the chance, for example, that we'll wreck our agricultural systems?
Well, I just want to let listeners know that Paul Ehrlich has to leave us at 20 after, which is about 5 minutes. So if you have any questions or comments for Paul Ehrlich, if you read his book in 1968, The Population Bomb, what did you think back then, and what do you think today about how things have changed or really not changed since then? You can give us a call at 866-798-8255, 866-798-8255. You can also email feedback@yourcallradio.org. And so, Paul, since you have to leave, I want to spend the next 5 minutes mainly with you. What really, this is such a huge conversation. We can just spend the hour just on population in the U.S. But what really concerns you right now in terms of population growth?
Well, the thing that concerns me more than anything else is that every person we add to the environment is a larger assault on our life support systems than the last person. In other words, human beings are smart. We didn't start farming the marginal land, now are moving towards the rich soils. We started farming the rich soils in the river bottoms and have now built our cities over them. So every person we add increases the chance of the first global collapse of a civilization. We've had past civilizations from Easter Island to Greece to the Mediterranean, to the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, where people not paying attention to the environment in part resulted in the civilizations collapsing. But there were always other places where you could build civilizations. We are facing the first general collapse of civilization, and it's not just from climate change. It's also from the loss of biodiversity and the ecosystem services biodiversity, the critical services that they supply us. The epidemiological environment is getting more dangerous. The chances, closely related to population size, of large AIDS-type diseases taking off again. The data coming in now on toxic substances, and the more people we have, the more toxic substances we add pole to pole in the world. The chances of nuclear war are going up, all of them tightly related with population and also with consumption. And so that's what scares me and all my colleagues.
And so where do you start? Give us something tangible here, because it is such a big issue.
The first place you start is where Bill started. You get a president who's willing to get up and say, patriotic Americans stop at 2. That we have too many people in the United States to be sustainable, that if we want to have the maximum number of Americans live, you have a sustainable population of perhaps eventually 100 million people or so going on for millions of years, not seeing how many you can cram in during this century and then have the whole thing collapse.
So having the President of the United States say a good citizen would stop at 2 children.
That's right. And also point out that around the world, it's the rich people who need to control their consumption as much or more than the poor people. Their consumption and their reproduction, because each rich person you add to the world does more damage than each poor person. Each poor person you add to the world makes it tougher for them and other poor people to get along. In other words, it's everybody's problem, and we've got to get off of any idea that some of us are good and some of us are bad, so some of us can have large families and some of us cannot. Although I must say in some very poor countries, there are good reasons for women to have more than 2 children. And that's reasons that we should be helping them get rid of.